Welcome to the library, Wonder. Today we'll be reading Scalykitty's work, along with one recommendation of his after we interview it. So, I hope you're ready. Let us begin. The election of Ralph Walderson. On November 3rd, 2024, Ralph Walderson cast his ballot as he did all ballots, with his own name written in for the position of president. He had done this every year since '76 when he found himself dissatisfied with both Jimmy Carter and General Ford. His hatred for Jimmy Carter was born out of his disdain for legumes. "I'll be damned," he said to his now ex-wife, "if I cast my vote for no damn peanut farmer." Ralph also refused to vote for General Ford, since he had read somewhere that Ford had served as the House Minority Leader, and Ralph, having lived his entire life in a trailer, hated houses. And so, a long tradition of throwing away his vote was born. This year, though, marked a turning point both in Ralph's life and the history of the country. On November 3rd, 2024, Ralph Walderson was the only person in the country to cast a vote. In order to avoid a mass loss of faith in democracy, and to hide the fact that they themselves had not participated in the election, those counting the votes began to fabricate ballots. Out of a deep sense of civic virtue, every ballot contained a write-in vote for Ralph Walderson, as to preserve the actual results of the election. News quickly spread of Ralph's startling 100% lead over his competitors via news networks covering exit polls. When other precincts heard of Ralph's overwhelming victory elsewhere in the country, they too began to fabricate votes. Soon, every precinct in America was reporting that Ralph Walderson had won 100% of the electoral, with record-breaking voter turnout, despite the fact that no one had voted. Ralph was among the last to know that he had won the election. Just a month beforehand, the cable company had shut off his service. Ralph, ever the problem solver, had simply run a small wire under his neighbor's mobile home, drilled through the floor, and connected to their cable. As an added bonus for his work, Ralph was also able to connect to the internet for the first time since the library had banned him on account of his terrible odor. Overall, a net gain for Ralph. His house of cards soon came crashing down when, 3 days later, the power company shut off his electricity. Because of his precarious financial situation, Ralph received most of his news through the phone on display at Circuit City. Luckily, this time the news found Ralph. Late in the afternoon, the day after the election, a black SUV arrived outside his trailer and whisked him away to the airport. He boarded his private jet, and during his flight made excessive use of the air sickness bags, unaware that the plane was equipped with a bathroom. When President-elect Walderson arrived in Washington, he found himself in quite the position. His election had marked a never-before-seen level of both political engagement and unity in the country. A wave of national pride washed over the nation, and every citizen enthusiastically supported their new leader. No one could risk outing themselves as a non-voter since civic virtue was all the rage. And, since no one had voted against President Walderson, all political discourse became a shouting contest between pundits, seeing who could sing Ralph's praises the loudest. Ralph Walderson became the most powerful man in American history. The only problem was that Ralph had no idea what a president actually did. Something about laws and wars he recalled from civics class. More than this, however, was a blur on account of his paint fume addiction and his extensive high school football career. Having been held back 6 times in elementary school, he was 20 years old by freshman year. All totaled, he spent 7 years on his high school football team before dropping out on his 3rd attempt at senior year. His patented no hands, just top of head style of tackling, combined with his school's lacking helmet budget, led him to a record number of concussions and a lifelong battle with epilepsy. His memory issues were a far greater problem than he had realized, because he had forgotten that he used to know more than he did. He had even forgotten his mother's name. That would have saddened him, but she died years ago and he had forgotten that too. Luckily for Ralph, he would not have any real problems for some time, as the current president, Jeb Bush, would still be in office for a few months. He took this time to figure out his platform. What issues did he want to bring to the forefront of the American political mind? He spent weeks mulling over various ideas, proposals, and declarations. He took diligent notes of his thought process, but was unable to read them because he was illiterate. He asked a Secret Service agent to read his notes back to him. but the agent was also unable to read the notes on account of the fact that Ralph had written them and Ralph was illiterate. To hell with speeches, he thought. To his mind, politicians did a lot of talking and not much else. He knew that he had to show the American people that he was different. No one needed another politician, people needed a hero, and Ralph had to prove that he was the man for the job. He called an aide and ordered him to go find a skateboard. President Walderson spent his nights searching the internet for how to do a kickflip. After watching 15 minutes of a tutorial video, he felt that he pretty much had the gist of it. Before he knew it, Ralph found himself behind a lectern at the top of the White House steps. He stood there, gazing through inches of bulletproof glass at the largest crowd DC had ever seen. He shifted his weight from side to side and fussed with his ill-fitting tie. It was so long that it fell well below his waist and halfway to his knees. It was his father's tie, old long torso Walderson, they'd called him. Ralph had not inherited his father's famously long torso. The issue was only compounded by the fact that the collar of his bowling shirt was not nearly stiff enough to support the weight of such a hefty tie. He may as well have had a noose tied around his neck. His foot brushed against the skateboard propped up behind the lectern. He knew he was ready. My fellow Americans, this is indeed an unprecedented occasion. I am, however, no longer an unprecedented man. You have chosen me to lead you, and that is exactly what I will do. Now, I know that you came here today to hear me speak, but I was not elected to speak, I was elected to act. Ralph grabbed the skateboard and took off in a dead sprint towards the stairs to his right. He tossed the skateboard onto the ground and jumped on top of it. He struggled to maintain his balance, wobbling side to side as he careened towards the steps. The crowd stood silent. Ralph approached the top of the staircase. He loaded his legs and prepared to cement his place in the annals of history. The front wheels of his skateboard caught on a raised brick and stopped dead in its tracks. Ralph, however, did not stop. He soared head first out over the stairs. There was a single moment where all the world stood still, and one man, one nobody from nowhere, cheated gravity as he had cheated democracy, and flew where men are angels, and there was no need for government. The moment ended, and Ralph hit the stairs teeth first. He tumbled ass over end down all 365 steps. The entire incident thoroughly embarrassed the nation and only reinforced Ralph's hatred of houses. From the deathbed of a dying lover. My fever soars and sweat pollutes my brow. The illness proves that I am but a man. The strength which youth bestows is gone, and now I weep as only dying sinners can. For I am not like you who loved your Christ. Instead I made my lust a golden calf. I worshipped you and canonized your tryst. I slew my son on your behalf. But you, devout and pure and free of sin, are surely bound for golden cobbled streets. So look and see your lover's final grin, for I will not be there with you, my sweet. When you reign to God's eternal grace, I hope that you forget my smiling face. Speakers of the wood. Hunting is a far worse crime than fishing because fish cannot write poems. But I have wandered the mountains and the forests, waded through the rivers which guard Eden. I have been where deer walk like men and speak like gods. Oh, how they plead to spare themselves from violence so foreign, and how their pleas turn to demands when they realize I've lost my way. What was I to do? Their voices rise in chorus, for the condemnation of my soul. The crime is unforgivable. So now I fish, because a fish cannot beg or shout, or mutter curses or commune with gods. The river babbles without promise or threat. There are no fish in Eden. A fish cannot write a poem. Alright, now that we've read his 3 words, let's begin the interview. Alright, so you've written 3 things. I believe it was the election of Ralph Walderson, from the deathbed of a dying lover, and Speaker of the Woods. That's correct?
Yeah.
Alright, first thing I have to ask. how on earth did you come up with the election of Ralph Walderson? Because that is, yeah, it's nothing like your poems, and it's very much out there in how it's written.
This is my like big point is people say that a lot, like because I write a lot. I don't just write on Wonders Library. I've got some stuff on the SCP wiki, and then writing is also my job.
Mhm.
I write like freelance for some, more corporate markety type stuff, and then I do obviously like other poetry submissions. Wonders Library tends to be things that I think have a specific voice that fits the library, and then I have other stuff that I'm like, this doesn't belong on Wonders Library. So Walderson is very different from the poetry I've put on the library, but I've got some other poems that are more similar to that. I also think that comedy is a lot like poetry, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about this.
Mhm.
Like with poetry, you're trying to say things without at least for me, trying to say things without directly saying them. You're trying to put people in a moment and have them look and create an emotional response and just like really give them a glimpse into something that they're not a part of.
Mhm.
And I think comedy does the exact same thing. You need to be efficient with how you're talking. You need like word choice is very important. And the real difference for me is the moment, right? Is like obviously it's a little crazy, like speakers of the wood, right? Like there are not magical deer in the forest that are upset that I was hunting. That's not true.
Mhm.
Um, but it's a falsehood that creates a very specific emotional response. And with comedy, you're lying again. You're just this that did not happen. That would never happen. You're not going to win the election off of one vote. You're not going to whatever, right? The difference for me is like I'm just putting people in a moment and showing them these events and going for just a different emotional response. Uh, as for like where I actually got Ralph, um, one of my friends made a joke a few years ago about like whoever. This was back in 2016. They were like, whoever wins this election, I hope they do a kickflip. That would be really cool. And I was like, all right, man, let's write about a politician trying to do a kickflip. And that was the first draft. And then it kind of just spiraled out of control from there.
Well, it certainly lived up to that. So I would like to say first of all, you did an excellent job with Ralph Walderson. Like it was very very fun to read, and it definitely lived up to that. You know what? A politician who's going to do a kickflip kind of vibe, because it's one of those things that at first you had no idea where it was going for like the first quarter. The middle part, you're like, oh, this is where it is. I feel like someone's going to stop him at some point. They have to. And then you get to the end and you're like, oh, oh no. It, you have done an excellent job framing, for lack of a better word, because I'm not very literary educated. Um, I assume that's the way. I'm college educated. I'm just not a literary student, or literature student. Um, like you definitely hit the end point, and you're like, oh, I expected this to come, but at the same time, I was half hoping in my heart of hearts that someone would stop him and he would be saved from this sheer embarrassment. But no, no one has done this.
Yeah, I mean, I really did want to create like a. I mean, I think all of my writing, more or less, has a sense of dread. That's like the common theme.
Mhm.
I'm glad that that kind of comes through with Ralph. Of like, there's no way this is actually about to happen,
Yeah.
right? Like you're kind of dreading like what is actually going to be the conclusion of this. And that's sort of the writing philosophy for Ralph. I've got another draft in the works right now.
No?
Um, it's just I'm so nervous because people liked the first one, and if they don't like the second one, it's going to be like I don't know. I don't want to ruin the character. Um,
Hey, as long as it's written by you, I think you'll do a great job.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and then your next two were from the Deathbed of the Dying and the Speaker of the Woods, I believe. So one thing I do have to ask, and again, you're free to not answer this if you want. I've noticed heavy religious vibes, because in the first one, it was very much about talking about like Christ the golden calf, being in God's eternal grace, that sort of thing. And then in the second one, you were very much focused on like where is it? Yeah, like the rivers of Eden, or rivers like Guardian, sorry. And you having been where deer walk like men and speak like gods. If you don't mind me asking, is there a particular reason you not necessarily focus, but bring up the idea of that sort of thing so often?
Yeah, no, that's definitely like something that I rely on pretty heavily.
Mhm.
Most of my writing tends to be not religious. I don't consider myself a religious person, but I mean, this is sort of my background is like I was all of my education has been very religious, even though I'm not.
Mhm.
So just like when I'm thinking about what's behind the world, if that makes sense, and like trying to tap into people who've maybe stepped over that boundary into what is real versus what is poetic, to me it's always been like maybe there is something out there. And this is a weird thing to say maybe, but one of my, not a pet peeve, but just a thing that I don't like, I guess, is when people seem super sure
Mhm.
of like what's going on behind the scenes of reality. Like I'm like, dude, there's no way you're this confident about this.
Yeah.
So I always try to like create a little bit of doubt, and I think Deathbed of a Dying Lover doesn't do that super well. Like the character is very sure that he's going to hell and that hell exists,
Mhm.
but it's a take that I don't hear a lot about being like happy that like your partner's going to heaven, even though you're going to be in hell, and like I hope you forget about me. Like don't worry about me in hell. Um, I'm just trying to like I don't know, like shake up some perceptions about religion, about spirituality, about things that are driving forces. Right. And I mean, I think that ties into Ralph as well.
Mhm.
Of like, we sort of, in America at least, we think of democracy and elections and government as something that's unapproachable, something that's kind of working behind the scenes. A lot of people are aware of it, but they might not completely understand what's going on. And just trying to give people a glimpse into like how confusing and scary it can be to actually confront that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd say you definitely live up to that. Again, as you said, like, Deathbed of a Dying Lover definitely hits more on the religious sort of vibe, but even there, you can tell that the poem itself definitely isn't about religion. It's more about the actual event that's going on and the emotions they feel for the person that they love. So yeah, you definitely hit the nail on the head in that one. Um, and then I guess probably about the second to last question. For Speaker of the Wood, how do I put this? So I'm assuming, based off of the way that Speaker of the Wood is written, either you've hunted before or you know someone who's hunted.
Yeah, that one is a really interesting origin story, I guess, for lack of a better word. I'm from a rural area originally. Grew up in like sort of, the sticks, I guess you could say. Um, and I've never hunted. I hate fishing. I hate hunting. I just think they're gross. Like, so I'm gonna go on a little bit of a rant about
Go
fishing
for
for
it.
like 30 seconds. If you're catching fish to eat, that feels weird. Like, I don't know. I don't eat meat, so I'm like, you can get by without killing stuff. I'm not gonna get too much into
Yeah.
that. But catch and release, I also have a problem with, where it's like we're just picking these fish up out of the water, hurting them a little bit, and then throwing them back in the water.
Mhm.
Like leave the fish alone. Like you're not getting anything out of that. Um, like you're bullying fish essentially if you're doing catch and release. So I'm gonna end my rant there. But I had a friend in high school who told me once like he can't hunt, he can only fish because deer remind him of poets. And I was like, what a weird thing to say, man. Like that was what an odd take on hunting. So I kind of ran with that. I kicked that idea around
Mhm.
for a while, and I finally ended up writing something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely get that sort of vibe from it. All right. Just two more questions then. First question. Uh, so you said you were working on another one of the Ralph Waldersons?
Yeah.
Any chance of like a vague idea on what it's written about? You're welcome to say.
Oh man, the problem with Ralph is that I can't. The thing is, right, is like you said, like the ending feels pretty disconnected from the beginning.
Mhm.
So I can't talking about the beginning. I don't want to spoil some of the jokes. and talking about the end, like I do not want to give away where he's going to end up.
Sure.
But I will say, like, the important thing with Ralph is he's a caricature of what people consider rural poor Americans to be.
Mhm.
Like a lot of the jokes and a lot of the things that happen are based off of things that I've heard or seen, or like media that I've seen that like really does not like poor America.
Mhm.
And that's where I grew up. And just like having to deal with those perceptions and stereotypes, I just wanted to be like, look, man, this is what you think America is a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, so the first one was about like interactions between poor America, rural America, and government. The next one's going to be about rural America, poor America, and like corporate America, like those interactions and that kind of conflict.
Mhm.
It's going to be sort of loosely based on Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, I guess, is the biggest spoiler I'll give.
All right. Well, as a business student, I am willing and ready to be slandered.
Good. Because I'm not going to be nice. No, it's going to be silly. It'll be great.
So, Antlers was the story you recommended for the readers to listen to next. Um, what was the reason behind recommending that story?
Yeah, so that was one of the first stories that I remember having an impact on me that I read on Wanderer's Library. Like I'd read stuff before that, but that was one of the first ones that I still remember being like, wow, some of the writing on here is really good. Stygian Blue's a fantastic author. He's a great guy. He's really funny. Um, I'm not going to gush too much about him because I feel like that'll be a little weird. But I really recommend, like, if you're looking for more stuff to read, if anyone is looking for more stuff to read, like, starting with him is a great place to start. Starting with the contest that's going on, if you're looking to get in, there's currently a contest where a lot of the bigger authors are writing right now, and there's a lot of really good stuff coming out of the contest. So if you're getting in the Wanderer's Library, you picked a really good time. Yeah, so one of these was my contest entry, Speakers of the Wood, and I no, like, Antlers is really good. It felt like it was sort of connected to Speakers of the Wood, which is why I picked that one specifically as opposed to some of other like Blue's other work. But yeah, no, it's really fantastic. I really like the prose, the progression. It's just a great story.
It's been a great time being able to talk with you about this. Thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate it.
And that's the end of our interview. Now let's read his recommended work, Antlers by Stygian Blue. Something started growing out of my face today. It's just a little thing, I told myself as I dressed. A small bone spur just beneath the right eye. It hasn't punctured skin yet, and it probably won't. It's probably been there for months, I told myself as I slipped into my robes and knocked the ritual sword, double blades and all, from its hiding spot in the ceiling. I felt at it again. That gentle pressure, and felt how it pressed just so lightly into the space beneath my eye at the socket. It was likely nothing at all. I walked out, and my landlord screamed. It's probably nothing. The Antler people greeted me on the bus. I smiled and they asked why I was winking. Oh, I'm not winking, I told them. It's just a little medical condition. I'll get it looked at tomorrow. Promise us? They asked and smiled, their antlers scraped against the metal roof. It looks quite serious. I felt my face. My hand came away wet, gleaming, and cold. My blood pumped, red iron, under damp skin, and I felt as though my limbs were spiders, powered by the hydraulic pressure of crimson liquid inside. As the bus pulled into the stop, I told the Antler people, "No, I'm quite fine. It won't amount to anything." The Antler people, if they could have winked, they would have done so as I departed. I walked onto the beach, and the air slid over my skin, like I were rubber and the sky was lightning. I pushed aside the wind and cold with my robes. The thing on my face was on both sides now, blotting my vision with spots. The kind you get when rubbing your eyes too hard. Shapeless whirls and vibrant yet colorless patterns danced in my vision, ephemeral in the slick night air as I picked my way over tide pools and starfish grazing grounds. The Antler people followed me down the beach. They were not the same as the ones from the bus. They too held ritual swords, some foam-hammered brass and others brilliant titanium. Mine gleamed dully in the stars and sea-refracted moonlight. A slotted iron fork, like a tuning time cut with blades. I twisted it idly in my arms, cradled it as the Antler people and I walked into the tide. It did not drop into the water. Here at the edge of the sea, a landmass of pines and salt damp murk rose from the depths like reborn Atlantis. Our little paradise above the waves, here for one night only. The things in my eyes were so cold. Vast now, huge and unbecoming, bone and gristle slightly furred to the touch. Perhaps they were velvet stag antlers. I did not bow my head to their weight now. The Antler people setting up the lanterns, who were not so busy as those pressing bone sand patterns into the earthy marsh, took my hands in theirs. Some had their sockets dry and gnarled from antlers long fused to skin and bone. Others were like me and still wept chunks of viscera down their pale faces from around the pale breakouts. I did not wonder how I could see this, given that, like them, my globes had been punctured at some point to make way for the iridescent flowering of horns, but I did. The Antler people setting the lanterns, I was not allowed to do the bone runes yet, I knew, showed me how to guide the jutting growths down the back of my head, across the vortex of my skull, and following the nape of my neck. Now, I had a gleaming crown of horns, and my vision remained unobscured despite the antlers sweeping back from where I once had eyes. The bone patterns glowed, and when the moon rose to her peak, we sliced the air beneath her looming belly. Our swords cut more than just the air, and sapphire blood drooled down from the heavens. Not rain, and not snow, and pooled and phosphoresced in ultramarine brilliance in our ritual circles. Our runes, dark with moonblood, glittered beneath our hanging lanterns and strings of green chemical candles, and the moon lowed to her sister, the sun, from the opposite side of the earth. She was not heard. The rest of the night passed swiftly, the air we breathed oily and grand, the forest soaked in the blood of the moon, and we quietly congratulated the trees as they straightened, as phoenixes chirped in hidden burrows, as direwolves and dragons sang and flourished under our care. Another year, another sacrifice, another way of living. Next year the moon would be back, and again the forest would be dried of life by the greedy moon. And again we would slash the belly of the pale radiance above and return balance to the world. And again, we would grow antlers, because nobody enters the woods without changing. As the sky purpled and pinked with sunrise, the Antler people and I donned our cloaks, buried our ritual swords still slicked with the blood of the moon under the nesting roots of the trees. The blades would appear by us again in the morning, forever loyal and fiercely faithful to our presence, and trotted out from the sinking forest as the night air began its annual fermentation. We could not be caught in the vanishing forest come the dawn. I thanked the Antler people on our way back. The beach stones clattered beneath our hooves and shoes. During our procession, the Antler person young enough that her sockets were still red and swollen from punctures pulled me aside. The sky lit her horns, twisted and elegant like braids in hues of purple and red. She told me as we walked, "Tomorrow, your antlers will be gone save for bone buds." Her posture was gentle and knowing. Next year, if you do not join us, if you stay inside and pretend not to hear the song of the ritual sword and pretend not to feel the longing to join us in the wood, you will remain unchanged. The year after that, the bone buds will be gone. And if I keep with you? I asked. If you keep with us, she said with a nod, you will be forever changed. You will become like me, with no eyes of which to speak. One night a year you will be compelled, not asked, to join in the slashing of the moon. Your body will change, and you will not return to the form when you wake the next morning. You will remember the woods all year long instead of slowly recollecting on the night you heed the call. And the absence will hurt you. She asked me, are you willing to make such a sacrifice? I looked to her, stopped in the wan light of the bloom and bleeding moon. Behind us, the forest strewn with fireflies and phoenixes and dragons whispered and faded into the mist, sufficient in its magic to remain unseen, untrodden, and unspoiled for another year. My antlers weighed heavily on my head and rubbed sharp against my clothes, but I smiled so wide my teeth could surround the sky. Yes, I said. My heart pumped full and joyful, and my lungs were breathless like they were filled with blooming flowers. The antler person nodded, her rack of braided antlers breaking the slit moon above, and bowed. We rejoined the procession, and as I made my way from the beach to the bus, my fur broke into mist and my clothes hung loosely against raw skin. As I ascended the stairs in the orange-pink filtered light of sunrise, the digitigrade joints of my legs reasserted themselves as knees and ankles, and I stumbled, held onto the railings as the bones in my spine too crackled and formed the long shape I had once been so fond of. I collapsed into bed and closed my eyes. I dreamed of the wood, and as the sun pierced my curtains, the antlers receded into buds. In my dreams, I ran free in the woods beneath the forever bleeding moon. I smiled and imagined I could feel the bone buds of the eyes growing minutely, freshly broken as they were, to become antlers grander than the moon and sun and stars. I imagined I could feel my ritual sword in air and mist, resting just above the slats of the ceiling and waiting for the next night. I couldn't wait to return. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful time out there.